Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. We feel good. We feel great and doing well, and we're going to do our job. But there's a lot of people today are not feeling well. You know, the ones who have anticipated that the stock market would go to the sky and last forever, and a lot of money being lost, and the world is suffering from, the virus, the coronavirus. And of course, I personally think there's an over-exaggeration of the danger of that, but that's there's danger in me just saying that, but I think that's been overblown. But the markets have been rocky, and I found something interesting this week because they announced that this was the largest drop from the peak of a stock market ever. You know, like 7 straight days, nearly $1,000 a day going down. It looks like today will be another down day. Because I remember one of the Austrian economists, the famous ones, one of the famous ones, told me many, many years ago, stock markets don't crash from the peak. They usually crash from 10% down, and then all of a sudden the recovery is evident. They don't pass a certain level, and they don't go back, and they can't challenge the old peak. But they're saying this is really the first time they've really noticed this. So it is unique. But I think, Chris, what this is a reflection of is not anything new or different. It doesn't challenge Austrian economics. It just sort of verifies some of our concerns that this is a big bubble, and this is probably the biggest ever. And, you know, they keep saying, this time it's different. It's not worried about it. But we were saying, yeah, this time it's different, but it's much worse. And there's not much joy in being close to predicting what's coming, this was a big bubble. It's cracked, and we don't know even whether it's going to last a week, a month, or a year, because people do different things, and governments do different things, and central banks do different things. But ultimately, the ruling comes from the individual, players in the market. So there will be a lot of mischief involved. Treasury and IMF and World Bank and Bank of International Settlements. They are going to be involved, and that's hard to predict. But I think the long term, the major problems, the bubble that was there was bigger than ever, and they kept that pump going solidly for 10 years, and they thought it could last forever. So this severe correction had been expected. You know, some say, well, it was the coronavirus. The coronavirus did it. I think the coronavirus had something to do with it, but we look at that as sort of, the ignition, because we understood the distortion, the bubble out there, the amount of artificial credit, the amount of malinvestment that goes on, the amount of debt in the world. So that is what people should be concentrating, not on what precipitated, last week's crash. It's a coronavirus, so all we have to do is print more money, and spend more money on dealing with that medical emergency. And quite frankly, I think the money spent there is just an aggravation long term to the market, and probably isn't dealing with the coronavirus, because I'm not sure they really understand everything about the coronavirus. And if you go by deaths being reported, you should get a little bit of reassurance, because there's essentially no deaths in the United States, and yet this flu season, we've had 10,000 Americans die from influenza. And in a year, it can be 600,000. It's all the reaction to it, and it looks like it was in the interest of some people to stir up the fear and problems that are going on. So, but it's practically impossible now for the politicians or anybody else to get up and say, calm down a little bit, let's think about it. But you know what? There have been a few scientists and people who were well trained in this type of a problem and epidemiology, and they come up with some sensible explanations. But politically, it's easy to demagogue this and try to place blame on the opposition. So Chris, I'm sure you've been looking at this and looking at how the markets are going, and it looks like it's been rocky, and gold has been challenged. And I think that we have to keep a close eye on all the markets.
That's right, Dr. Paul, and I agree with you 100% on coronavirus just being a fuse to what we've been talking about for years. Here's a breaking news. The coronavirus did not create the stock market bubble. The Federal Reserve did. And we've been talking about that over and over, telling people that this is very bad what they're doing because they manipulate the economy. They manipulate money. They counterfeit money. And prices are the lifeblood of the economy. Prices are supposed to tell us the truth about supply and demand for every resource in the economy. People make economic decisions, investments based on prices. When they're a lie, you're making bad decisions. Now, when they tell the truth, there's still going to be bad decisions, but they're not going to be a gigantic bubble like they are now. And that's what the Fed has created. By interfering with interest rates, by counterfeiting money, they've turned the economy into a carnival funhouse or a house of mirrors. You don't know what decisions to make. You have companies out there that don't make money, don't know if they're ever going to make money, and that's just fine. Just like during the dot-com bubble. That's what they do, but because there's economic activity, the president walks around saying this is the greatest economy ever. No, it's the greatest distortions ever, and distortions have to be corrected, and that's when the financial crisis comes to correct all of these mistakes that the Federal Reserve has engendered.
Right, and things like you've just talked about can go on a long period of time. And although, Austrian economics teaches us how to anticipate it and spot a bubble, others, Keynesians, say, no, you never know when there's a bubble. But Austrian economics teaches you can't spot them. But they also teach that you don't know exactly how big it'll be, how much it will last, and how people will react, and what the central banks will do, and what the politicians will do, and all sorts of things, and what will the effect of a viral scare that's going to wipe out half the population of the earth. All these kind of things are involved. But I think what helped in the conventional sense 10 years ago, when they had the crash in 08 and 09, was Keynesian economics. At least it tided things over. They said spend more money, run up the debt, print more money, and a lot of pain and suffering. And then we still had, housing bubble crashes and lots of pain and suffering. But it always is the fact that the government can take care of it. And what really helped tide us over and got us another boost in the bubble 10 years ago was the fact that the dollar was strong enough to rescue it. Rescue the system. So the dollar printed and manipulated in the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars, and things gradually crept back and to a point where people were feeling a little bit better but hadn't solved the problem. At the same time, some people were feeling better. The number of people who were living on the streets dramatically went up, and all that did was give fodder to those individuals. See, freedom doesn't work. That's why we need socialism. But the governments over a long period of time have used gold as an indicator because that's what the market wants to use. The gold price, and what will the people do, and that'll tell you what the government is doing. So what do they have to do? They have to regulate gold. They have to rig the so-called price of gold. What was the first thing that FDR did? He got that out of the way. We're just taking it into old gold. We're not going to let the people vote with their pocketbook or their intuition and decide whether should they have gold or not. We'll make it illegal. And he did that all the way from 1933 up to 1971. But that was the indicator. But the rigging of the price led people to believe the dollar was strong. And the dollar did stay strong. It still is strong. But they're really getting antsy right now. I'll bet they're antsy right now. The plunge protection team that's supposed to keep the stock market high, keep the economy booming, take care of all the deficits, finance the welfare state, finance the military industrial complex, and take care of the world. Well, they had to continue this doing it. So one of the things that we noticed last week was all of a sudden when the gold price was going up too fast, they identified that somebody came in and dumped tons of gold. And it was said and written that this was the Bank of International Settlements. That's the central bank for all central banks. And they have a lot of power, whether they have their gold in their pocket, they have a lot of clout with it, so the price of gold was driven down. But since then, the gold price came back up, but now gold is under attack again, but it's in the interest of the state. It's in the interest of those who have to protect the dollar, and so the indicator is once again being attacked, and yet long term, maybe next week, maybe later today, the market may overwhelm because they can't win that fight, just like they couldn't win the fight of fixing the dollar at $35 an ounce for all those years. Eventually, they have to cave in, and that's what you don't know is when that happens, because there's a subjective interpretation of everybody who deals with this, and there's all competing with governments and central banks who have to rig things. They're just in the business of lying. And the lies can help a whole lot. Like they've spent nearly 100 years teaching people deficits really don't matter, and printing money doesn't matter, and we can rig this all. And they taught people, and people really believe it. It doesn't matter. So where are we now? The world is in $255 trillion worth of debt, and ours is sky high. And every time there's a problem, even now, coronavirus, it's a serious problem, and it is. I won't deny that. It's a problem. So what do? Well, we'll ask the Federal Reserve Board chairman, is he going to help bail them out? So they go to the Federal Reserve, as if printing more digits, more paper money is all of a sudden going to handle things. I keep thinking that make sure that the market forces are there and information is available. The other day I heard something where somebody, the travel has been impeded, by the fear that exists, and they were having trouble getting the products they need to keep businesses open, and it was getting more complicated. And then there was a criticism because somebody in the process was gouging. And I keep thinking, that gouging is raising the prices to show you there's a scarcity, encourage people to produce more or take more of a risk, under these conditions. So that is the last thing you do, is need more management of things. And the other thing that caught my attention was the fact that right now they're concerned the number of cases are expanding in Iran. And of course, they're way out of control in China. That happens to be a system of government that's the last thing from free markets. But there's a lot of people suffering there. But Iran have already been suffering for decades under the thumb of the U.S. government, putting sanctions on all the time, and it's a poorer country. And it is now known that coronavirus, if a person is in good health, matter of fact, young people don't seem to be getting it, and if medications aren't available and the economy is slumping and economic conditions are poor, that raises it. But they would never, nobody wants to ever talk about that maybe we made it tougher for some countries. Fortunately, so far, it looks like we're not going to have that type of thing happen here. But I just don't think that the market is going to all of a sudden be able to, the government's going to come in and take care of this, because, one term that we've heard about for a long time is first, in medicine especially, first, do no harm. And I wish we could teach our government to do that. First, do no harm.
Right. We'd live in a different world if they followed that dictum. But you mentioned, Dr. Paul, manipulated gold, because this week we saw pieces that were written, the people that really dive in and they expose this stuff. Well, yeah, of course they manipulate gold. Think about who we're discussing here. These are people that when they campaign for office, they lie. Everybody knows that. When they're in office, they lie. They lie about the economy. The president says greatest economy ever. They lie about giving everything away for free. When it comes to war, they lie before, during, and after the war. So why would anybody think that gold is off limits? They're not going to touch gold. Gold will stay at a market price. Absolutely not, because gold is their major enemy. Gold is what, if we went back to gold as money, that would put an end to all this, the spending, the debt, the wars. When you think about the world wars, these were major conflicts that happened with central banking, fiat money. If there was gold money, how would they finance it? They can't counterfeit gold. So of course they manipulate gold, but manipulation, as you also touched upon, can only work in a short term. And the short term may be decades or even 100 years. Because when you think of the grand scheme of things, 100 years is nothing. It's a spit in the bucket. The market always reasserts itself. The truth always wins in the end, and gold will win in the end.
You know, Chris, one interesting period of time early after the Bretton Woods ended in 1971, because in the 60s I had been reading about and studying, got fascinated with monetary policy and the international gold standard. And it was anticipated even from 68 up to 71 that this would happen, the Bretton Woods would break down, and after we got rid of about 70% of our gold at $35 an ounce, people reckoned, hey, you know, it's not right, it's not working, we don't want to give up all our gold. So that's when the Bretton Woods broke down. But there was an anticipation before 1971 and immediately after 1971 that people could buy gold. It wasn't legal yet. It wasn't legal until 1975. But after 71, there was more purchase, and it was sort of like legalizing marijuana. They got to a period of time where they weren't throwing as many people in jail, but you weren't being arrested for buying gold. So gold was to be legalized, became legal again January 1st, 1975. So in 1974 and a couple of years before, gold prices kept building up and building up. And on the day gold got re-legalized on January 1st, gold was $195. And there was a lot of anticipation, you know, that wow, if it's now the American people can buy gold. Guess what happened? Gold went down. It went down for a whole year because a lot of people knew what was going on. So this whole idea. But the one thing happened to make sure the gold price went down and to sort of diminish anybody's enthusiasm for gold and not the dollar is the fact that the Federal Reserve came in and interfered. And the IMF, they dumped gold. And the Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department dumped gold. So the first day it was legalized, gold prices went sharply down. That's understandable, but it also is a trick. It's also a lie. It was also that concerted effort always to try to confuse the people, to try to protect, the monopoly money, the government money. And, it worked. The 70s were rough and tumble, but, by the 80s, the dollar maintained its reserve currency. And even after 07 and 08, they've been able to maintain, but it's always the manipulation. Right now, that's why I think that the goal will be to make sure the metals don't do well. So it doesn't mean that all the rules out and you should never be considering gold, but long term it should be a different way. But it's also the reason that I never thought it was very smart for me to be involved in the futures market just because of the manipulation. And there's not only this effort by the governments to do it for the protection of their monopoly. It's also done by people who are in the banking business, and they rig and try to control the market. And there's been good cases. There's been some good people who challenged this, and they've won some cases in court where they tried to rig and control the silver market and the gold market. It still happens. But for all of that, I think the biggest rigging and the greatest danger is when our government officials get involved and rig gold. And that is what I think they'll use to try to punish people who try to prove otherwise. And eventually, though, when they say that this is different and we're smarter now, some of the Fed chairman told me that, we're smarter now, we know how Greenspan was won. He used to tell me, he says, yeah, you're right, Ron, we know about gold and you understand it. But he told me, he says, but we believe that we understand this better and we can make the dollar paper system work as if it were gold. And I said, well, good luck. And so he did that, and of course it didn't work, and it can tide things over. But the great danger of the establishments, tiding things over and helping, and people say, hey, it looks like it's going to be more. It looks like it's going to be work and give us some extra time. All they do is make the bubble bigger. It is different this time. It's different than ever before because the bubble has been bigger than ever before, and I don't think we've let out enough air yet for anybody to be comfortable. It's going to be rough and tumble, not because the answers aren't there. The answer is just let things go. Let the bankruptcy come and go back to work and get rid of the government taxing system and monetary system. It's not going to happen. So they're going to make it linger. And that's what they did in the Depression. They tried to say, well, we know how to get out of a depression. And of course, all they did was delay it. We didn't get out of the depression until 1946. So it is different now. And unfortunately, we in the free market, Austrian School of Economics, we don't have a whole lot of say in Washington because Keynesianism and socialism all are prevailing. But there's still a lot of people out there that know the difference. Now that their system is crashing, the biggest challenge we have is not letting those so-called socialists get away with saying, see, the free market and capitalism and gold, it's all bad. We need to explain the difference of crony capitalism and Keynesianism camouflaged as a free market system, and show that that's the problem, and that's the one that introduced all the bubbles and all the bailouts. So unless we prove that, we're going to end up with too many socialists getting involved in this next election.
That's right, Dr. Paul. I'll finish up. You mentioned we don't have much pull in Washington, but we have pull with the people that matter, and that's the people that watch our show every single day, and we couldn't be more thankful for that. And as Dr. Paul always alludes to and closes a lot of times with his statements, is the role of government. That's what the big picture is. Because no matter who you are in this world, or no matter how much money you have, life is hard. It's constant problem solving. Now, when you add government to life, they make things really, really hard because they multiply problems everywhere. But there's varying degrees on how much government problems there are, and that's how much they are allowed to interfere in life. If they are allowed to interfere very little, they'll create very little damage. If they interfere a lot, and we have the biggest government to ever exist on earth, ever, they're going to mess things up a lot. And that's what we have. America's founders, they wanted a government that would interfere very little. They thought at that time it's a necessary evil, they thought. Is it a necessary evil? That's open for debate. But they wanted it, if you're going to have this evil, to be small, that it can't ruin people's liberties. Well, that was then, and this is now. They've now run roughshod on our liberties. But the answer is always the same, to go back to having a government, if you're going to have one, that is limited to these certain powers that cannot interfere with your liberty. And the best way, in our opinion, to get that ball rolling is to end the Fed.
Very good, Chris. And I think that we can continue to make progress if we convince enough people, important people especially, who are involved in producing and spreading ideas, is that we have to realize that people vote and do things because they believe it's in their best interest. Why would they give token support to the so-called solution makers in running for the presidency right now as somebody that can offer us, well, it's free stuff. Well, if we can't prove to them that it's not in their interest to go along with free stuff, then that's our problem. We're not doing a very good job because, common sense tells you, and I think young people especially respond to logic more so than people who have gone 20 or 30 years in our economic and our political system, because they've been proven that you have to have management. But it isn't in their best interest. But right now, it looks like people think that free stuff is in their best interest. Well, I would wonder, if that's the way the people feel in Venezuela, that free stuff, where are they going to get this free stuff? And that to me is the challenge. And we have opportunities in spite of all the shortcomings with the internet. Our message has been getting out, and more so by a lot of other people. I think the sentiment is there. And so talking about sound economic policies being the solution to the people who want a better time and want a big middle class. For instance, how do you get the largest middle class and a prosperous middle class ever? It's under the greater the freedom, the greater the middle class. And right now our middle class is shrinking. But the number of people who are understanding and interested in honest, upfront free market economics and sound money and limited government, our numbers are growing, and I think that's good news, and we're going to keep at it. But I do want to thank all our viewers for tuning in and giving us support, and I want to urge you to come back to the Liberty Report soon.